the Truth, Money, and Freedom podcast.
Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom. Today is Monday, the 17th of May, 2021. Hey, gang, I got back from the press conference just a little bit ago. I'm editing it right now, as you see. But I want to let you know, before we get started with this, that the audio was not optimal. So it was in a shooting range, by the way. And then also, too, it was echoey. And Eric Burleson, for those of you guys who know him personally, he's kind of a soft-spoken guy. I'm trying to clean up the audio as much as possible before I put out the press conference. But you will find out when Eric is speaking, it's generally not very loud. So you may have to turn up your speakers just a bit. And then, of course, there's the loud booms going on in the background, and that's people actually shooting at the range. But just my impressions. The press conference went very, very well. KY3 is that's the local NBC affiliate. That's the one you hear speaking the most, the questions that are being asked the most of by the mainstream. And so I look forward to see how they take care of this in the evening hours. I'll see if I can get that recorded as well, to see if they try to do a hatchet job. Because they have not been supportive of our Second Amendment rights at KY3. I just have to say it. I know that when I say things like this, it makes me unpopular, and they may come back and haunt me in the future. But guys, I just call them like I see them. KY3 seems to be very anti-gun to me. But so do some sheriffs, so do some people in the Senate. Even a couple of people or more than a couple of people in the House. So it went very well. I was standing in the background. I was behind Jared Taylor and Eric Burleson. So my wife was actually doing the recording. So thank you very much, sweetie. So at any rate, without further ado, here is the press conference, such as it is. I've cleaned it up a little bit, so it's a little bit better than it was originally. Sorry about the audio, gang. But you should be able to hear most of it if you turn up your speakers at certain points and then turn it back down in others. So, all right, like I said, gang, here it is. And by the way, it was a real honor and privilege to be there. And we got time to sit down and talk with Jared Taylor and Eric Burleson and Mike Moon, another senator, and then a couple other representatives as well. And it was just a real privilege to be able to be there for this. This is a big deal, gang, and eventually this kind of stuff is going to sweep through the red states of the United States of America. And it started here with the strongest SAPA or Second Amendment Preservation Act bill currently in the United States is right here in Missouri. So, like I said, without further ado, here it comes. Have a good day, gang.
Get started with the introduction real quick. First of all, I've been asked to introduce the representatives and senators who've actually voted for and supported the bill. Of course, Senator Burleson. We have Senator Moon as well. We also have the sponsor, Representative Jared Taylor, and co-sponsor Bishop Davidson. We also have Representative Ryan Seitz, Alex Riley, Representative Bill Owens, Representative Curtis Trent, and we also have a couple of, I think I've got all the representatives. We also have two local officials, Commissioner Lynn Morris and Circuit Clerk Barbara Stillings. So anyways, we want to thank everybody for new mayor.
And our new mayor. Brad Jackson.
Brad Jackson. Brad, if you want to come up here, sir, we want to get you a few supported stable, which I assume is why you're here. So great. Anyways, so it's my honor and privilege, the man that I work for now, Senator Eric Burleson. So if you would join me in
I first want to say this effort would never have happened without the tremendous support of grassroots. We had a lot of people that were involved in this, and there's so many people to thank. And I'm gonna speak quickly, but I'm gonna turn it over to who I think are the real rock stars, which are their House members, whose names are attached to the bill. This effort was not something that just happened this year. This was an effort that has been in process for almost a decade. We had constitutional scholars who helped draft this language, attorneys who used precedent of court cases that went all the way back to the very founding of the United States. When it became, the first court decision was Prigg versus Pennsylvania. And so if you want to go back and study that, whenever you're going to bed at night, that'd be a great topic to sleep to. However, this topic was something that I just want to make clear is well studied and well founded. And at the end of the day, there's never been a better time to pass it than now. Because we have an administration, we have a president who is hostile to the values that we hold dear in Southwest Missouri, to the values of the Second Amendment. And as you all know, if the Second Amendment isn't there, then we don't have the First Amendment or any of the other rights that we have in the Constitution. Passing this bill was essentially telling this president, who is very hostile, who has already passed executive order after executive order to take away our rights. In essence, we told the president to go pound sand. That in the state of Missouri, yes, that in the state of Missouri, that we stand for the Second Amendment, and while he's not going to do so, we're going to remind him that the state of Missouri and all the states are the ones that created the Constitution. We're the ones that created the federal government. We're the ones that ratified the Constitution. The states ratified the Constitution. So therefore, the federal government cannot infringe on our Second Amendment rights. So it's reminding them about their place. We're telling them what their place is. So this bill simply does this, in essence, says that local law enforcement has plenty to do already in enforcing the statutes of Missouri. They've got enough to do to focus on the crimes that are taking place in Missouri than to be commandeered by federal agents and be taken around enforcing things that we consider against the Second Amendment. It's that simple. And so I want to say thank you to a lot of people, including the gentleman who originally crafted the language. He was an attorney out of Northeast Missouri, Dave Rowland. I want to say thank you to Dale Roberts, who is a judge out of Columbia, Missouri, who is constitutionally sound, and also because he helped us work with law enforcement. I want to say thank you to law enforcement for sitting down with us and making sure they understood how this bill would be a money for their officers. I want to say thank you, especially thank you to the grassroots, to organizations like the Missouri Firearms Coalition, which really held lawmakers' feet to the fire and made sure that we were actually getting things done. Every step along the way, whether this bill was in committee or it was being, between committee and the floor, every step along the way, a bill like this could easily have been killed, and people were trying to kill it, often trying to kill it silently. But because of grassroots like you and those behind me, that we put so much attention and pressure on this bill every step of the way that it made it undeniable that this bill could not be quietly killed. And because of that, I want to say thank you to the grassroots. And with that, I want to turn it over to the real rock stars, who I consider fantastic, which are not only these two gentlemen in the House who supported this bill, but really everyone in the House. I can't say so much about my colleagues in the Senate. It was very difficult convincing them to prioritize a bill like this and to make sure that it was important. And there's a lot of ways in the Senate to kill a bill. But again, I'll say the only reason why we were able to get it through the Senate and fight through is because of the grassroots support like you did. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Jared Taylor, who is the chief handler of the bill in the House.
Well, thank you all for being here today, and I can't tell you how thankful I am for the grassroots. Like Senator Burleson said, had it not been for the grassroots, for groups like Missouri Firearms Coalition, for the MRA, which is the Missouri Republican Assembly, had it not been for them, this bill wouldn't be where it is. If it weren't for every single person making phone calls, emails, coming up to the Capitol, knocking on doors, asking senators where they stood on it, and to stand firm, we wouldn't be here where we are. We would have a weak bill like all the other states that have passed legislation that doesn't do anything. But this bill is the strongest bill in the United States that will hold our Second Amendment and making sure that it isn't infringed upon. That we have a federal government who right now is attacking the Second Amendment. I was asked on the floor, well, why is this such an emergency? Why do we need to get this done? Well, the answer is simple. Because we have an administration who is right now trying to redefine what a short barrel rifle is. They're trying to make law-abiding citizens in the state of Missouri illegal citizens, or illegal, and their weapons that they possess illegal overnight. If we don't pass something like this, and if the governor doesn't sign it, we're in big trouble, because the federal government is coming after our firearms. This is no longer a hypothetical. We had a presidential candidate who said, hell yeah, I'm coming for your AR-15 and your AK-47. We've got federal legislators who are working on legislation that want to redefine and limit ammo capacity. They want to redefine and limit a type of weapon that you have. So this is happening right now. I don't know about you, but I think that Missouri citizens, Missouri legislators, best know what laws need to pass in the state of Missouri rather than out of control congressmen from Illinois or from California. We know best here in Missouri what to pass, and I want to hold our law enforcement accountable for what we pass, not what they pass in D.C. And that's what this legislation does. This legislation says that we're not going to be commandeered, our resources aren't going to be used to enforce federal laws, especially when it comes to gun rights. And I think that this foundation, this anti-commandeering doctrine that we're using, could be used on a multitude of different levels in the state for different issues that the federal government is out of control on and asserting our rights. So I want to say thank you to everyone, all of you grassroots. Thank you very much, and I would like to turn it over to Representative Bishop Davidson, who co-sponsored this bill, who is also part of this bill string, House Bill 310.
I always feel a little strange being here because this all began, well, first I suppose it began with Senator Burleson inviting me up to speak on the Second Amendment Preservation Act in committee. Last session, unfortunately, we weren't able to get it to move where we needed to move then. And after winning the primary, I sat down with Representative Taylor, and I said, what do you think about me submitting the same language that you've been submitting all these years, and seeing if we can have them joined in committee? He knew how important the bill was to me, he knew how important our Second Amendment was to me, and he graciously allowed me to become a part of this movement, and a part of this process, and a part of this bill string, as he said. And a part of that, though, was that if it weren't to get through this session, and if he were to term out before we could get it across the finish line, that I'd be carrying it on. Fortunately, we didn't have to rely on that contingency. Fortunately, it was within my first year as a legislator that I got to see the Second Amendment Preservation Act passed here in Missouri. And how important it was, considering where we are in the first 100 days. Right? We had a lot of promises as to what these 100 days would be, but what I'd say is what they have become is only a fulfillment of what's been laid out and set out before in administrations past and by a federal government past. This is not just a new idea to have our rights infringed. States' rights, states' authority being infringed, that's not a new idea. That's a centuries-old idea. But what the Second Amendment Preservation Act does, and what Representative Taylor spoke to, is it not only secures our Second Amendment from infringement by federal laws using our constitutional protections, but it also lays out a roadmap for how we might push back against federal encroachment in the future. We can't rely on congressmen, senators, or even the president to effectively reduce the size of our federal government. We've seen glimmers of hope, but for a system of change, and for change across the board, it's going to have to be the states themselves which seize that authority. The states themselves which push back on that encroachment. And so while we have a victory today, and a victory that we can rest from for a moment, it's equally important that we begin the work and setting about the work for using the roadmap that SAPA provides to apply the principles of anti-commandeering to a number of issues that exist between the states and the federal government. And so while my work was marginal, my vote was there, my name was on the bill, sure, I look forward to continuing to work that Representative Taylor and Senator Burleson have begun as as a freshman legislator, as an opportunity to continue the work in the House and continue the work in the Assembly. And I couldn't thank them enough. They've been tremendous mentors, tremendous guides throughout this process. And of course, I thank everyone here as well and echo them in the grassroots movement. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to the Missouri Republican Assembly. They were fantastic. They came up every week to knock doors, go door to door, and ask individuals where they stood. And again, I want to say thank you to the Missouri Firearms Coalition, as well as a number of organizations that came up day after day to volunteer for this effort. With that, we'll start taking any questions that you might have.
Senator Burleson, given the Republican majority in the Senate, Republicans have traditionally been supporters of the Second Amendment. Why were you getting pushback from some of your colleagues?
Missouri, I often say politics is one thing, but what I've found is that over time, the Capitol building is much like what Shakespeare said. All the world is a stage, and people have, I'm butchering this part, but the people are merely players. And what you find is that regardless of party label, there are people that will fall into a particular role or pattern, and some of them are not so, while this might be an issue that's important, it doesn't strike all the right notes for some individuals, and it may not be at their level of priority. Another thing that could potentially happen, and I think did happen with this, is that when you have a bill that is so popular that it's clear that everyone has support behind it, it can be easily leveraged for other bills. And unfortunately, this bill was leveraged by multiple other issues. There were times when I was being called into meetings and being asked to do things for other bills just to get this bill done. And I want to be proud to say it. I never did anything except fight for this issue. And I'll give this bit of wisdom, if I will, to those who are new, is that you should never compromise your principles to get something done. You've got to continue to just hold your head high. At the end of the day, this job will only be here for at most 8 years, at the most. And you've got a life beyond that. So I don't know about everybody, but I want to be able to sleep at night for the next 40 years of my life. And because of that, I'm not going to compromise or leverage other things just to get something like this done. But it was the right thing to do, and we leaned into it as far as we could. And because of that, I feel like we got it, at the end of the day, we got it across the finish line.
Now, none of you may be able to answer this, but given the society we're in, inevitably the Democrats are going to sue to try to block this. Has the Attorney General commented on the constitutionality of the bill and where he stands as he'll have to defend the bill?
I've not had any comment from the Attorney General. Have you guys heard anything from the agent's office? So there's a lot of the bill that is what some people would call the preamble, but that language is written by a constitutional attorney who is really trying to lay the groundwork for any kind of constitutional challenge and making sure that a court understood exactly where we stood and should go to court.
Senator, what do you see as the big benefits for local law enforcement agents like sheriff deputies and Christian deputies?
That's a good question. When you speak to local law enforcement, the last thing they ever want to do is be told that they have to go round up firearms or go round up magazines. Any time that's ever been tried, it's very unsafe. Okay? And so it's also, principally, most law enforcement are very supportive of the Second Amendment, and they don't want to be enforcing something that they consider to be a violation of the Second Amendment. We overwhelmingly, I would say, rank and file members of law enforcement would let us know that they supported this bill. And so this, I think, makes a bright line for our state and local law enforcement to make it clear to them that they have one job, and that is to enforce the laws on the books of the state of Missouri. And that if it's not on the books of Missouri, they've got plenty of other activities for laws to enforce.
And what about for federal agents operating in Missouri, like U.S. Marshals or the FBI?
So unfortunately, we cannot unwrite federal law. So it's similar, just in the same way that marijuana is still illegal in Missouri, and yet our local law enforcement officers are not enforcing marijuana laws. This is very similar. In fact, it's using the exact same concept. And it's still illegal, marijuana is still illegal, and we cannot unwrite any laws or executive orders at the federal level, and ATF agents or federal agents might still be trying to enforce some of these laws, but we are not going to have our local law enforcement lift a finger to help them enforce their unconstitutional gun laws.
What if they decide to bring force in and bring federal forces in to try to take anything?
We cannot stop federal agents from doing their thing.
I guess kind of that end, you mentioned that Second Amendment is what keeps the First Amendment in place. Is the idea that where an armed public prevents that physical action is in reference from the federal government?
Yeah, and while no one ever wants anything to ever come to that point, that's, I think, the reason why we have the Second Amendment. It creates a chilling effect on any kind of tyrannical leaders that might want to come in and start taking away our rights. There's a, when people talk about the Second Amendment, people often forget that over the last 100 years, over the last 100 years, people living today, who are still breathing air today, have experienced genocides across the globe. From the Ottoman Empire, where they slaughtered almost 2 million Christians simply for their faith in the 1920s. We have Red China, you have communist Russia, you had the events that happened in Rwanda, you had events that happened in Cambodia not too long ago. And these are all events where again and again and again, these nations first required gun registration, then they had high taxes and fees on firearms, and then eventually they did gun confiscation, and then ultimately they genocided their own people. So this is not something that doesn't happen. This has happened again and again over the last 100 years in multiple nations. In fact, more people have been murdered by their own country over the last 100 years than anything else. So over 100 million people over the last 100 years have been murdered by the country that was supposed to be keeping them safe. So that's why I think what the founders did with the Second Amendment is not about hunting, it's not about making sure that you can come and for sporting, come to a firearm range, not about gun collecting. It's ultimately about making sure that the United States doesn't end up like Rwanda. It doesn't end up like Cambodia, or what happened with these other nations where they genocide their own people.
Do you believe that in the 21st century United States that's legitimate concern of some kind of government-led genocide of American citizens or something severe like that?
I'd like to think that it's not, but that's why you've got to keep a protection like this in place so that it doesn't get to that point. I will say this, if you had asked me a year ago, would I think that our own country would prohibit people from attending church? I would have said you're out of your mind, right? But we're in a quickening in this world. We're at a quickening pace. A lot is happening very fast. And I think that at this time period, we need cool minds to reflect on history and the mistakes that have happened in history.
Can I add something to that? So one thing I'll say too is that the framers, the founders knew that if the states pushed back, that they wouldn't have the resources to enforce federal law. And I think that's the brilliancy of our country is how our framers knew this, and they had the forethought of putting in place something like the anti-commandeering to make sure, because they knew that if states pushed back, that the feds wouldn't have the resources. And we have multiple states now who are using our Second Amendment Preservation Act as model legislation. And I think there are 4 states currently that have passed SAPA in their states, and I think there are 7 other states who have something similar. While our state has the strongest and has the teeth of the legislation, the other states are doing this. And if all of our states that support the Second Amendment band together, it's going to stretch the federal resources then, and they won't be able to come in and do this as a whole, or bring all of their resources in, because they just don't have the resources. They'll be stretched thin thin, it won't be possible.
You mentioned the churches being closed. It seemed like an off-the-wall question, but do you feel that in the last 10 years or so, the school districts around the state have not done a good job teaching the basics of the Constitution, that people just don't really understand their Second Amendment rights and it's important?
I don't want to speak for everyone, but I would say yes. I would say across the board, our nation has really failed our children in teaching them what it is to be a republic. I was unfortunately, and I was in Republic middle school not too long ago and asked the group to raise their hands what form of government is the United States. And overwhelmingly, in fact, not one person said it was a republic. They thought it was a democracy. To which I asked the question, help me pledge allegiance to the United States, to the democracy for which it stands, right? The irony, this is the great irony, is that every state has language within their state constitution that explains why we are funding public education. We don't fund public education so that everyone can get a job someday. We fund public education so that we can keep the republic, as Benjamin Franklin once said. So that, in fact, Thomas Jefferson and the founders very well knew that if you don't educate these voters, they will lose the republic. They will lose this and so that's why we fund public schools. Their mission should be to make sure that students understand.
But they're not doing that. They're going to do it 1619 thing and also the race problem.
Now, what I would say in regards to the education question, or question of education, the House, I mean, we have Representative Seitz with us. The House has started a conversation surrounding 1619 curriculum, surrounding critical race theory. And to be quite frank, education policy is probably what I'm personally most interested in. It's almost lamentable that the Second Amendment Preservation Act is necessary at all. Although I'm happy it's here now, I'm happy we've run the course. I'm looking forward to really addressing issues of education. And I know that there's a lot of us in the House working on it. I know Representative Seitz has already begun work on that. And I know that I personally intend to be filing legislation revolving around American history, Missouri history, and civics curriculum throughout the state of Missouri, so that we, as a conservative bloc, can say this is what we're for. Instead of just being against things, to really put forth an agenda that says this creates a certain knowledge and love of America, and then from that love of America, we're able to look back and criticize America, right? And I think it's from that position of affection for our nation that we can learn from our mistakes, learn from our past, learn from our history, and improve upon it. But the issue of constitutional education is absolutely of the utmost importance, and as Senator Burleson has already spoken to, it'll be a part of this legislation too, so that we can see a populace of Missourians who know exactly what they need to do to maintain the republic. Thank you.
Might be a good time to segue to vouchers. That's a hot issue right now. A lot of criticisms, it'll be on the public schools, other folks in favor of it. Anyone feel free to answer where you guys come down on that.
I have two of those first ones, so yes,
the ESA issue education savings accounts, charter schools, vouchers. I mean, it's a very contentious issue in the General Assembly. But generally, I think, and I think there's a wide body of support throughout the state, that parents should have a great deal more control over the educational destiny of their students, of their children, than they do right now. And the best way to do that is through market forces. And the way to achieve market forces while still maintaining the public funding, the universal nature of access to education, is to give parents the ability to choose between different kinds of educational institutions and to have control over the resources, the money that's used for that funding. This General Assembly that just concluded, there was an education savings account bill that was passed that will begin what is essentially, in my mind, a pilot program, a relatively small program, to give parents a tax credit that they can then use to apply toward the education of their child. I think that program is likely to be a wild success, And once we've proven that concept, my hope is that we will begin to expand that program around the state so that parents who have concerns about what their children are learning, parents who have special needs children who need a different kind of curriculum or different kinds of accommodation for their child will have control over a portion of the state funding for that child's education, and will be able to direct them to the educational resources of their choice, the educational resources that they need in order for their child to be successful. And as was mentioned earlier, a big part of that success is that they have learned the cultures and values of our society, the system of government, how they can be complete citizens in our society. But as we all know, there's also a big economic component to that too. We want kids to be able to succeed in life, both politically, civically, and economically. And I think choice and market forces are the way to get that kind of success into our schools and get that kind of success more widespread than it unfortunately is right now.
I guess then in 10, 20 years, where would you hope to see that program go? What would that look like in terms of public education, private, kind of a mix thereof?
Well, I think each step is the next step. So if this initial program is successful, broadening it makes sense. And you know, improve each step of the way that we make things better, that the education system is more functional, then that tells us where the next step should come. So, you know, my ideal in 20 years is that parents have a great deal of control over where they send their kid, and the state funding follows the child to education and opportunities.
Any concern what that looks like for public schools down the road? Or is it a case where with market forces, if they are not good enough, they will disappear?
No, I think competition makes things better, and I think our public schools are well up to the challenge of this, and I think they will only get better with time as these competitive forces come to bear on them. You know, I think people. I'm certainly a product of public schools myself, and you know, had a great experience in my own public school, and I think a lot of people in this room, a lot of people around the state have had great experiences in their public schools. Very caring, conscientious teachers, very you know, caring and attentive administrators, and I think they're well capable of providing an education opportunity that parents will want to send their kids to receive.
Now that you have this bill passed, where do you see the next battleground in fighting for Second Amendment rights?
Well, we have already, Representative Taylor and myself already have bills in place, so we've been trying to progress, making sure that what we don't have, basically in Missouri right now, we have many locations where we do not allow that entity to allow firearms. Even concealed carry holders would walk into some of these locations. So these are called gun-free zones, but I would just call them victim zones, because these are areas where a person who wishes to do the most harm, the most damage, unfortunately, can do quite a bit of damage, because law-abiding citizens are leaving their guns at the door. And so this is one bill amongst others that we'll be focused on. Do you have any comments?
So being in this building, we're not too worried about other people coming in.
That's right. The safest place to be is in an area like this, or oftentimes people talk about going to the auctions or some of the gun events, the gun shows. That's the safest place in the world is to be is at a gun show. Any other questions?
What's an example of an order or an action that President Biden or the executive branch has taken that you really deem to be hostile, or of the utmost concern when it comes to Second Amendment?
So what he's done, he has started an investigation of red flag gun laws. He's pressing states to pass red flag gun laws, which is basically registering and doing what are called ex parte hearings on individuals who are reported. That means the person has no day in court. They have no say. They suddenly, because of a backroom discussion in a courtroom, they have been deemed to not be allowed to carry firearms. And so I would say that that's a violation. Some of those more, what you would consider silly ones, is he's recently had an executive order on pistol braces, which I can't think, in my mind, is actually an absurd ban. Pistol brace helps an individual who's carrying, a pistol to be more accurate. And I would think that we want people to be accurate and not be inaccurate if they're defending themselves. So I think that unfortunately, a lot of the decisions that are being made out of ignorance. And this is a man who said, no one needs an AR-15. A woman doesn't need an AR-15 to defend herself. She just needs a shotgun. And he said that he tells his wife that if she hears something, to walk out on the balcony and shoot 2 blasts into the sky, which is just irresponsible. This is coming from an individual who's apparently espousing irresponsible firearm activity in his own home. He is the last person who should be passing laws or executive orders telling us what we ought to do with our firearms.
Regarding braces and SBRs and all that, as I understand the ATF, the policy that legalizes, say, an AR pistol with a brace, this is a federal thing, would provide that it's not just a political policy issue, help? Sure. Basically, as I understand, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but an AR pistol with a barrel, either a brace or a stock. Would making that not an ATF policy and something that actually is codified at federal level be a step in the right direction?
Well, what is the benefit at the end of the day? I mean, to me, this is, we put these laws in place thinking that this somehow helps people, but then the manufacturing community responds, right, by meeting the letter of the law, and then you end up with what is in essence a silly outcome. At the end of the day, I believe no restrictions should be made on something that could keep someone potentially safe.
Right. And to add on that, if you redefine the SBR, what an SBR is, you make legal gun owners overnight illegal. You make the weapons that they possess, you make them illegal, because now those items are going to have to be have a stamp in order for them to possess, and these individuals aren't going to have that stamp, which is then going to make them illegal and potentially have issues with the federal government. That's why it's such a bad idea. You're making thousands of Missourians overnight will have illegal weapons and become illegal, and that's the problem.
I guess my question is, should the brace be codified as a pistol regardless of ATF policy?
Regardless of ATF policy?
Or should the policy not be an issue in determining whether or not a shorter-barreled tactical rifle is a pistol or a rifle?
I think we should leave it up to state policy, and that's why we have the SAPA, is because we think that we best know what happens in each state, and it shouldn't be left up to the federal government.
So are you seeing those actions where they're trying to make those illegal, the federal government's first step at trying to go for mass gun confiscation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like Senator Burleson said, that the reason why you have a registration or why the federal government wants to know what weapons we have is, I think the next step would be a confiscation or an involuntary buyback program. And that's why you start off. So House HR 127 is on the federal congressional level. It's a bill that is being proposed that does all of these things. It requires additional background checks. It requires mental health screenings for every gun owner every year. It requires an insurance. So what you're doing, they're making gun ownership almost impossible for the average everyday person, and they're wanting them to become illegal by putting all of these hurdles in place. One of them is specific weapons are being banned. 30-round magazine or high-capacity magazines are being banned. So that's why they're doing these is for future confiscation or involuntary buyback.
All right, guys, let's wrap it up here with that, and then obviously we'll stick around. There's a lot of other lawmakers that have other pressing issues, and if you guys had questions about other bills that have passed, now might be a good idea time to take advantage of that, their availability. And before I leave, I want to say thank you to Sound of Freedom for hosting this. It's a really tremendous. I just want to say thank you for letting us interrupt your business flow.